Up next, we have Dr. Robert Durborow. Dr. Durborow has been a state extension specialist for aquaculture here at Kentucky State University since 1990. He helps landowners with their farm pond management, including aquatic weed prevention and control. He also directs the KSU Fish Disease Diagnostic Laboratory. He came here from Mississippi State University and before that from Auburn University and LSU. Dr. Durborow is going to be joined today by a co-presenter, Gunnar Psurny. Gunnar is an Extension and Research Associate in the Fish Disease Diagnostic Lab at Kentucky State University. He is a dedicated aquaculture health professional specializing in fish disease diagnostics. Gunnar studied aquatic biology and fisheries at Ball State University in Muncie, Indiana, and has a master's degree in sustainable aquaculture with a focus in aquaculture nutrition from the University of Stirling in Stirling, Scotland. With experience in large-scale recirculating aquaculture production of Atlantic salmon, aquatic vegetation management, and sustainable aquaculture principles, Gunnar works extensively with largemouth bass, tilapia, and catfish from aquaculture farms throughout Kentucky. With a passion for advancing sustainable aquaculture practices, Gunnar contributes to improving fish health and ensuring the productivity of aquaculture operations. All right, so everyone, welcome me in joining Dr. Durborow and Gunnar up here to talk to us about their wetland management.
Good afternoon, everybody. How many people here own farm ponds on their property? And quite a few, how many of y'all have an aquatic weed challenge problem? Okay, so a lot of people do. I'm going to address that issue this afternoon. Also, are there any pesticide like applicators, not pest, I guess maybe herbicide applicators that get licensed regularly? Anyone in here? Okay, yeah, quite a few. Have y'all worked with Forrest Wynn? He has in the past presented CEU credits for pesticide applicators, and he's retiring at the end of the year. So Gunnar and I have the challenge of trying to figure out how to replace that role. I think that's a very important role. Okay, so basically, let's see if I can figure this out here. Okay, good. Yeah, so we were both introduced. Gunnar, I don't think it was mentioned that he is relatively new here. He started here in September, and he came from Aqua Bounty. When you're in front of people, you kind of sometimes Aqua Bounty, which raised genetically modified salmon up in near Indianapolis, not too far, a little bit north of Indianapolis in Albany, Indiana, and he also has a good experience with aquatic weed control because after Aqua Bounty closed down, he was working for an aquatic weed control private company. So he has a lot of practical hands-on experience. So I consider him a valuable component of this presentation. Okay, so there's a lot of purposes for ponds not just in Kentucky, but in the U.S. for watering livestock, for domestic uses like swimming and fishing, fire control, just to have it handy in case there's a fire, to have a source for the water to be pumped from, irrigation, naturally, recreation, aquaculture, fish farming, just aesthetics, just the fact that it makes your property look nice, flood control, and sometimes ponds result because of mining, some borrow pits, maybe phosphate was being removed from an area, so there's a resulting pond that's there. Okay, when you talk about aquatic weeds, and there's a lot of herbicides and a lot of aquatic weeds, I tend to be able to categorize weeds in like where they grow. And usually if you point out and identify where they grow, it's pretty obvious how to control them. So I think, this might be a pointer? Is there a pointer? Oh, pointing at that, okay, I see. I think I'm not going to do that. That just really confused me. Okay, so you have emergent weeds. Let's think cattails. And you think of like herbicides like glyphosate, for example, which we tend to think of Roundup. Well, the glyphosate for aquatic environment is similar words, rodeo, because it's always kind of cute how they make the little transition there. And then there's submerged weeds like the bottom right there. They're under the water, but they're rooted. And then there's ones that are filamentous algae that float on the top. Sometimes they start on the bottom of the pond like a green rug. You see, it looks like a green rug, and then it gets filled with gas bubbles, and then it breaks off and floats up to the top. And then phytoplankton, which is like the green algae bloom that you get in the pond. So different weeds are controlled by different herbicides, and really the best way. And these next few slides will point this out. When you get into herbicides, and you're in an aquatic environment, it's like you pick out the very best herbicide that's recommended, but a lot of times it doesn't work. So it's best to prevent the weeds from showing up in the first place. So these macrophytes, or big weeds, compete with phytoplankton. The phytoplankton is part of the food chain, and another problem with the bottom bullet there, another problem with macrophytes is they provide a hiding place. So if you're trying to fish out bass and bluegill from your pond, you might not be able to get them out. And if you're trying to harvest, like with a seine net, it makes it very, very challenging to do that. So the weeds, the macrophytes or weeds, interfere with fishing and seining. They prevent fish from finding the feed if you're feeding the pond. A lot of times, if you have cattle, it's a good idea to fence off the cattle from the pond. What happens when you allow cattle to get into a pond is the pond eventually fills in. It gets shallower and shallower, and the more shallow the pond gets, the more easy it is for weeds to grow. So you don't want that to happen. So it's good to have use a gravity-fed water tank. So you could use water from the pond, but it can be channeled to a tank out where the cattle can access it more easily. So one thing you have to ask yourself, is there septic runoff into the pond when you're building a pond? Is there excessive fertilizer runoff from surrounding crops? If these things are a problem and you identify them, you go to the last bullet there, maybe create a buffer zone, like an area of heavy grass growth between where the source of pollution is and where the pond is. Okay, so how to prevent macrophytes? Keeping the water depth 3 feet deep, well, at least 2.5 feet or 3 feet deep or deeper is a good strategy, because if it's shallow, the sunlight can reach the bottom, and that's where the weeds start to grow, at the bottom of the pond. So also, the other thing that renders the pond to be shallow is if the pond bank is not steep enough. So if it's a nice steep bank, like a 3-to-1 slope, then it makes it hard for weeds to grow on that pond bank. If the pond bank is real gradual, then it's a lot of shallow area and the weeds can grow a lot more easily. Keeping turbidity in the water. So if the water is very clear, then the sunlight can penetrate and can get the weeds growing more easily. So keeping the water turbid with keeping the phytoplankton growing is a good thing. And also, if you use a dye like Aquashade, for example, it helps to shade out the bottom. And then if the pond is brand new, before it fills up, disc under the existing weeds to start off. That's a good way to start off. Okay, so macrophyte prevention, still this category. Try to keep that phytoplankton bloom, like I mentioned, or the Aquashade or other blue-green dyes. You can stock grass carp or white amur at about 7 per acre for prevention. And as the macrophytes show up, you can use manual harvesting. Just kind of think of cattail, just pull them out as they show up. You can use chemical control for macrophytes, but that is expensive and doesn't always work quite as well as you think it will. And then maintain fertility with either a fertilizer or if you're feeding the fish in the pond, that can act as a source of fertility to keep the bloom growing. So when you're, okay, the last point there, stocking koi, which are carp, they're common carp, but they're colorful, they're called koi, and about 100 per acre. The stocking rate might be a little bit not well defined quite yet. Okay, the total alkalinity, in order to sustain the phytoplankton bloom, the green algae in the pond, just that gives the water the green color, the alkalinity should be at or above 20 parts per million or milligrams per liter. So if it's not at that level, you can add agricultural limestone, like finely pulverized or pelletized limestone can help there. Okay, triple superphosphate can also be a good source of fertilizer, and those are the application rates and the price, et cetera. For the sake of time, I won't go into each one of those. We do have handouts after the talks are over, and you can contact our email too. So I think we don't have that many handouts, really. I didn't expect there to be quite this huge turnout. So if you need to contact us by email, we can email you the fact sheets and that sort of thing. Okay, so there are two things with liquid fertilizer. It's heavier than water, so you want to dilute it out first before you apply it. Otherwise, it'll sink to the bottom and get bound up in the bottom muds. And also, if you're dealing with a granular fertilizer, it's good to put it in some kind of a container so that it gradually dissolves into the water and doesn't just go straight to the bottom and get tied up in the bottom muds. Okay, so looking at koi for aquatic weed control, this was a pond in Marion County that was covered extensively with pond moss or Pithophora, very, very hard to control. We stocked koi as a demonstration project. And in this demonstration, we put 45 12-inch koi into this 1 acre pond. It did not seem to have any positive effect, but 3 years after this stocking, the koi were 2 feet long, and then all of a sudden you never saw the weeds. They kept the pond turbid, and so what it does is sometimes the koi not only stir up the bottom muds and make the pond a little bit murky, muddy, but it also releases the nutrients which keep the water fertile and keeps the bloom growing and shades out the bottom of the pond. So basically, when the koi were not large enough, they were not as effective. But once they got to a certain size, they were effective. Okay, this is a pond after koi were added, and you can see kind of that greenish brownish color. So this is a lot better than having the ponds clogged up with weeds. So having a farm pond that's ultra clear might sound nice at first, but then it'll soon get clogged up with weeds. So you have to have a pond that has a little bit of a turbid look like that. And here's some at our research station up here at the university where you can see the bloom growing there, that greenish brownish color, because koi are in those ponds. And you can see what the koi do to the bottom. You can see how the mud is mounded up and piled up in certain areas of the pond. That's just evidence. So after the pond's drained, you can see what the koi have done to the bottom muds. They're very active. This was in Jessamine County. The bottom muds here were kind of a white clay type of material. So when the koi, and you can see the little the orange koi there, when they stirred up the bottom muds in this pond, it made a kind of a white, milky white color. And also there was a dye, blue-green dye that we added to that pond as well. So it gave that like blue-green, white, kind of a murky, which was good because it shaded out the light from the pond, prevented the weeds from growing. You can use a Secchi disc to determine, you want to keep the visibility like less than 18 inches, 1.5 feet of visibility. You can use a Secchi disc, or you can put your arm into the water up to your elbow, and if you can see your fingers, then it's a little bit too clear. And it's funny, with all the various sizes of people, usually the length from a person's elbow, bending their elbow to their fingertips is it's real standard. I mean, it's real consistent. I know y'all are going to probably test that out. Okay, so macrophytes, there's ones that are submerged, emerged, like the ones that grow out of the pond, like cattails. Marginal, cattails would fit into that as well. Floating plants. Okay, so we're looking now at just different examples of submerged weeds. Coontail, bushy pondweed or naus, sago pondweed. Sago pondweed is on the left, and then Cara or muskgrass is on the right. That's a big difference because the one on the left is a higher plant, and you can't use like copper sulfate to control it. But the Cara or muskgrass can be treated with copper sulfate or bluestone. It's a very cheap, easy treatment. But they both look a little bit similar. They're both weedy looking, but the one on the right is actually an algae, which is controlled by copper sulfate. And here's just some pictures and characteristics of muskgrass or Cara. It has like a garlicky smell. When you crush it up, it's kind of brittle to the feel, to the touch, rough to the touch. Okay, algae versus higher plants. Algae can usually be controlled with copper sulfate, your bluestone. And I mentioned, Cara or musk is an algae. And a lot of filamentous algae can be controlled by copper, but Phytophthora is that wet, woolly type of filamentous algae, and that really needs a special kind of a herbicide for that. Okay, so this is just some examples of different algae treatments, and the copper sulfate should be dissolved properly before it's put into the pond. You don't just throw the crystals out into the water. Okay, so chelated coppers, like Cutrine Ultra, for example, can be effective against higher plants. And so copper sulfate alone will not control higher plants, but if it's a chelated copper, it can very well control higher plants. Hydrothol 191 is not a chelated copper, but that will be effective against Phytophthora. And then here's a list of various chelated coppers. We won't go into all those names. Okay. And again, I guess for the sake of time, we can kind of go through, go through them. We can send you this PowerPoint by email if you would like afterwards. Just let us know. Here's another submerged weed, the curly leaf pondweed. And there it just gives you an idea of the pondweed growing out in the pond. And there's some herbicides that control submerged weeds, Aquathol K, Aquathol Super K. Well, I skipped over the top one there. Reward, which is diquat. Weedtrine D is also diquat or diquat dibromide. And then the chelated coppers that we just mentioned. And then you can go to that website there for aquatic weed labels. Diquat dibromide, Reward is that's the one that has a little bit higher concentration than the one, let's see if we can go back, than the Weedtrine D at the top there. So Weedtrine D is cheaper than Reward, but it's a lot more diluted than Reward. Okay, and then you have to keep in mind that there's certain withdrawal periods before you can swim in the pond, before you can use it for irrigation or for drinking. This is a contact herbicide, okay? And so because of that, you can treat like 1/3 of the weeds and then wait like 14 days or maybe a week or so in between and treat the next third, and then wait a week or two, then treat the other third. So contact herbicides can be used like that. Systemic herbicides Well, we'll go into this detail later. They have to be used to treat the whole pond all at one time because they're taken up by the plant. It's a slow time consuming thing, like over a period of several weeks that it acts, and you can't just treat a section at a time. And here's an example of reward, which is 37% active ingredient, and the price for it. That's the weed treating D. It's only 8.5% active ingredient, diquat. And then here's some other diquat brand names. And then another herbicide, Aquathol Super K, and Aquathol K is liquid, Aquathol Super K is a granular. And these two are also contact herbicides. Okay, and this is a list of some of the weeds that it's effective against. Okay, so there's certain parameters you want to wait till the temperature is warm enough so it can be effective. Part of that reason is if the weed is actively growing, certain herbicides work if the weed's actively growing, so therefore the temperature has to be high enough for that to happen. And then, again, be cognizant of the withdrawal period before you use the water for things like livestock and irrigation. Okay, Sonar is kind of a miracle kind of herbicide. It's very, very expensive. It's fluoridone, and so it's a treatment of choice for duckweed and watermeal. It can control weeds, keep them under control for more than a year, even after you use it. It's expensive. Sometimes it's the best and only choice, and it does not kill phytoplankton, doesn't kill the bloom, so that's one of its benefits. And it kills a broad spectrum of submersed weeds. There is a less expensive one called Sonar RTU, ready to use. So it's a lot more dilute, but it's a lot more affordable. We'll get into some of the prices later in the talk. Duckweed can be a real issue with how many people have had duckweed on their ponds. Yeah, it's pretty common in Kentucky. Watermeal, it's a lot smaller and it feels gritty, kind of like cornmeal. And here's some things that are some points and bullets on Sonar or fluoridone. Avast is another trade name, and these are some of the submersed weeds that Sonar can control. And like I mentioned, it's a systemic herbicide. It kills weeds slowly over a long period of time. And basically you can't treat sections. If you just do half and then wait and then do another half, you're like doing two underdose treatments instead of two treatments. So if it's a contact herbicide, what you put it on is a treatment. Then the middle third is a treatment. But if it's systemic, it's meant for the whole pond all at one time. Okay, another systemic herbicide. This one, Gallium, is sometimes used as a rotational partner with Sonar, just to make sure that the weeds don't develop resistance against Sonar. And it too kills weeds real slowly, and you have to treat the whole pond at a time. There are no restrictions for potable water use, livestock consumption, swimming, fishing. So this is a newer herbicide, and some of the newer herbicides are designed so that you don't have to have those withdrawal periods. I think they specifically address certain metabolic pathways of the plant that don't interfere or don't correlate with the metabolic pathways for mammals. So that's kind of like an advanced feature of some of the newer herbicides. This is a relatively new one too. Just for the sake of time, we won't go into that. So I think, is this where you're, okay.
Hi, I'm Gunnar, Psurny, taking over for Dr. Durborow. So we're just going to go through the rest of a few of the herbicides that are commonly used. This is Renovate, Triclopyr, aquatic herbicide labeled for submerged, emergent, and floating plants in pretty much any aquatic site. Controls alligator weed, American lotus, milfoil, parrot feather, hyacinth, and water lily, water primrose. So it's pretty across the board control for most plants that cause issues. The active ingredient rapidly understood to target plants' leaves and stems, interfering with plant metabolism, and then provides systemic control of the plants. They'll usually die off in about 2 to 4 weeks, and then you probably see those effects visible in after the first week of after treatment. It's available in liquid, flakes, and a lot of times you can mix a few herbicides together for a more comprehensive treatment. So Renovate Max Triclopyr with 2,4-D amine in a granular formation. That's just kind of an example. So on the far you can see a spray application and as well as the granular application with applicators up there. 2,4-D, good for water milfoil. However, positive results for several emergent weeds, smartweeds, primrose, willows, water lilies, arrowheads, and parrot feather, as well as water hyacinth. About $20 a quart, so it's a little bit more friendly for the wallet. And then you can see here's a parrot feather treatment before and after a 2,4-D treatment. Going into the emergent weeds on control. This is just a large, vast expanse. Probably looks like maybe some smartweeds or some emergents. And then spike rush, willows, alligator weed, cattails, everything that you're going to see growing on the edge of your pond, as long as the roots are under the water and then most of the plants above the water. One of the major treatments for those is glyphosate. We know is main ingredient in Roundup. When you use glyphosate, you want to use it with a surfactant mixed in that'll help the pesticide integrate into the plant, get through that waxy cuticle on the leaves and such. These are just a name of many surfactants that you can find probably in most farm stores and things like that. Rodeo, more commonly used aquatic glyphosate. Shore Clear is another name. Runs about $100 and $200 for a 2.5 gallon jug. Another one is Aquapro, and then Habitat, which is a Mazapyr, which they say is glyphosate on steroids. Habitat, Arsenal, Polaris, and Aquapyr, some common names of that one. Does control plants which are completely submerged or have a majority of their foliage underwater. So any plants that are completely underwater, like your milfoils or things like that, you do not want to use the glyphosate on those. Has to have some form of plant outside of the water because it has no water activation. Controls alligator weed, arrowhead, parrot feather, water lily, water primrose, cattails, smartweeds, willows. So yeah, those emergents. Longest part of the plants outside of the water should be effective for those. As well as duckweed and water hyacinth. And then you can use about 1 to 6 pints per acre depending on the weed. And there's more information on that one as well through that link. Some environmental precautions. You don't want to treat more than half of the surface area of the water in a single operation and wait 10 to 14 days between treatments. Water treated with Habitat herbicide should not be used for irrigation purposes for 120 days after application. Of course, you don't want to water your flowers with water that you just put an herbicide in. And then, of course, recreational use. No restrictions on recreational or livestock watering. And then Amazamox, known as Clearcast, systemic, can treat sago pondweed and curly leaf pondweed, which is a really common invasive, milfoil, hydrilla, and water hyacinth, as well as some emergents and floating plants like water lily. Also with this one, you want to use a surfactant to help get into those plants, especially for the emergents and floating weeds. Bispirabac sodium, sold as an 80% active ingredient powder. Another systemic herbicide, inhibits amino acid synthesizing enzyme, kills slowly after 30 to 60 days. And you don't want to use water in the presence of crustaceans, so any shrimp, crawfish farming, things like that. Carfentrazone ethyl, known as Stingray, liquid contact herbicide for floating weeds, such as duckweed, and it can also be used on milfoil. Best when applied to mature, actively growing weeds. And you shouldn't want to use it in a quarter-mile upstream of an active potable water intake unless that can be shut off or diverted in some way. And then flumioxazin clipper, granular contact herbicide, quick acting, degrades quickly at high pH, so apply it in the morning when the pH is low in those waterways. Been on the market since 2011, good field reviews, works well on submerged weeds as well as Pathophora and duckweeds. And going back into Flumi, group 14 herbicide, so those plants might develop a resistance to it, so you might want to mix it with something else or use it in alternating seasons. Let's see, sodium carbonate peroxyhydrate, Green Clean Pro, phycomycin, and PAC 27, granular algicide, fungicide. It's going to bleach those algae really fast on contact. You want to break up any floating mats really quickly before you apply it, just to make sure that it's actually penetrating those mats and getting the full effect of the pesticide. Procelicor, it's a relatively new one, systemic herbicide to manage freshwater aquatic vegetation and slow-moving quiescent water, so ponds, lakes, etc. You can use a tiny amount of this and it'll work really well for large applications. Also, of course, you want to use your PPE when applying any of the pesticides, really. Good for floating plants like water hyacinth, emergence, alligator weed, American lotus, and water primrose. As well as the submerged plants, coontail, hydrilla, parrot feather, and water milfoil. Also, can highly probable the plants are going to get resistance to it, so you want to trade that out by seasons. There's some use restrictions that you always want to be careful of when using any pesticides. Just follow the label, depending on which one. And then a couple more, phycomycin, SCP, non-copper algicide and cyanobacteriacide, 85% sodium carbonate peroxyhydrate, oxamycin P5, algicide and oxidizer. And then just some common aquatic herbicides. So if you have filamentous algae, copper sulfates, Pathophora, hydrothol, submerged weeds are going to be mostly contact, some systemic herbicides and emergent weeds, rodeo, glyphosate, floating weeds, sonar, reward, those kind of things. Of course, this can be distributed throughout to you guys. Some common prices. I want to point out the sonar, the fluoridone, that is $500 a pint. It's probably the most expensive. But like I said, it's the most effective one, can treat plants for longer than a year. A little bit more prices, Renovate, Aquathol, and then AquaShade. These are dyes that you can put in the pond to shade out weed growth to the bottom. From prices for Galleon, $700 a quart, Nautique, $123 for 2.5 gallons. There's Bisurac Sodium, Clipper, Flumi, Imazamox, which is clear cast. Here's the pricing source. And then for more pricing, they see the Flumi, I believe it's on Fluoridone, $700 to $1,300 per acre. So yeah, kind of depending on which weed, which is best for your wallet, whichever one is best in the aquatic management plan. And then another biological control is triploid grass carp. You want to make sure they're triploid so they can't reproduce in your pond. You want to stock like 0 to 50 per acre, depending on the amount of weeds that you have or want to control. About 10 inches in length at time of stocking for them to be most effective and quickly. So yeah, 5 to 10, 10 to 15, or 15 to 25 for a heavy weed infestation. And then, yeah, that kind of wraps us up. My name is Gunnar. Psurny. If you have any questions, Dr. Durborow will be happy to answer any that you have.
Have any questions? Questions? Where you at? Oh, here you go.
So with the use of grass carp and triploid, what is the assurance that they are not going to be able to reproduce. Because trying to bring in a non-native species into a pond, that causes some problems if all of a sudden they are producing.
As long as you're getting them from a reputable source, such as like Jones Lake Management, you can probably ensure that they're triploid. They do that as they breed the grass carp. It depends on the egg stage where they make those actually triploid cells in the. So yeah, as long as it's a reputable source, you surely shouldn't have any problems, as those are highly regulated kind of distributions of those species of fish to make sure they're triploid and can't reproduce.
Or they're sold, their blood samples taken, before the triploid grass carp are sold, they take a blood sample and they'll run it through a system that checks for white blood cells or red blood cells. I can't remember. But anyway, that it can identify whether it's triploid or not based on that technology. Yeah.
More questions? Question back here.
I want to first say that for a few years we have looking for folks to help us in like aquatic habitat management. We've had a lot of trouble. You know, forest obviously has been a source for the entire state, and I get questions pretty regularly about aquatic weed management, but mostly in the context of managing for wildlife. And so sometimes our practices need to involve pond edge management, where we don't want to remove everything, but maybe we want to thin some of that vegetation out. Are there examples in y'all's experience where you would want to use like combinations of mechanical and chemical control? And can you just give us maybe an example or something of what that might be?
Yeah, for sure. So in my experience, personally, this past summer, I was working for an aquatic vegetation management company, specifically targeting invasives. So we'd go through wetlands or marshes, pond edges, and specifically target cattails, autumn olive, purple loosestrife, things like that, whether it be with wicking with our hands, gloved hand on a specific plant, or just targeted spray. It's really important to have an integrated plan that involves, maybe some physical management, going out and raking those leaves or weeds out, as well as using some herbicides. I know a lot of people want to limit their herbicide use and things like that just for environmental issues. But yeah, really integrating a plan with mechanical or altering the substrate of the farm edge or the pond edge with like riprap or putting a sand in or tarps or things like that to try and kill weeds like that.
Well, so you have going on about with this pond owner how to get rid of the cattails. And then the husband and wife looked at each other and said, well, we like the cattails there because they attract red-winged blackbirds. But then the converse point is that if you have too many, kind of like what you said earlier, if you have too many there, it eventually turns the pond into a marsh. So you have to, maybe you can leave some cattails to attract the birds, but for the most part, try to get rid of most of the cattails, just for an example.
And specifically regarding cattails, yes, you can use herbicides, you can change the water depth, you can excavate. In your experience, has there been, what's your ranking of effective methods?
Yeah. I think herbicides they can be pretty effective if you use the right ones at the right concentration. If you want to get your hands dirty, go out and rip them up out of the grounds. You really want to get that whole root system up and out. It can always come back though pretty quickly, and they spread super fast throughout the ponds. So, yeah, I think probably I'd probably mechanical first, going out and ripping them out, and then herbicides maybe on the back end after pulling them out, just to make sure that they get down into the roots.
Other questions before I ask another one?
On the cattail theme, I came across some research many years ago that I was really surprised. It said you could drown cattails, and I didn't think you could drown cattails, but this was about cutting the cattail below the water line, and that would allow water into the root system. Has that been an effective technique, or any local research or anything about that?
I have not used that personally. I've not heard of it, but it certainly makes sense. Those shoots are coming up out of the water, so once you cut them off, the water's over that level. Would be a good control method.
I was going to say, in reference to the previous talk, that we don't do that. What did he call it? Cut and squirt or whatever. we just do the squirt. But apparently, it sounds like the cut might be effective against cattails. So.
Anybody else? We're not stimulating any other questions? Maybe they all had the same questions that I had, right? I do want to ask another question, though, about managing aquatic insects, right? Aquatic insects are important food sources for things in the water as well as out of the water, those aquatic insects. Are some of these herbicide options, are they a big issue for some of these insect communities that we need?
It's not something specifically I've studied very much, but surely like a contact herbicide or like copper sulfate, things that kind of settle down in the sediments, I can see those being effective or negatively affecting inverts. Probably the systemic herbicides or the ones that are taken up by the plant that are more plant specific for the metabolism and things like that. I'm sure those probably are a little bit less negatively affecting for those inverts, but yeah, copper sulfate, diquat, flumine, maybe things like that. Some contact herbicides might affect those inverts a little bit.
Do y'all in your aquaculture practices, specifically targeting fish, need to consider insect communities as like a food resource at all?
Not particularly, because they're mostly on provided feed. So the farmers are going to be throwing pellets in, feeding those fish, trying to get a faster growth rate rather than, so the fish are probably feed trained. They might go down and look for, some bugs if they can get them as a little snack. But yeah, mostly those are going to be feed trained, like pellet trained fish, and they're going to want to stick to their kind of formulated diets.
Finish up with one more comment. It's more to put you on the spot and try to weasel my way into some kind of commitment from you. Once again, this is a room full of predominantly natural resource professionals. We're concerned with improving the natural world, right? And aquatic habitats are part of that. But in most cases, this community selectively can have aquatic environment, habitat management as part of it, but not most of the time. And so I'm in particular looking for resources to help refine some of the guidelines, put together just general habitat guides. Like Department of Fish and Wildlife has habitat guides, like general habitat guides for some practices, but we need a little bit more details. And I'd love to be able to collaborate with you, since we're all at K-State too, right? And K-State's natural resources management program is growing rapidly. We'd love to be able to collaborate with you to develop specific prescriptions and guidelines and scenarios for some of the work that we do. Is that something at all that y'all might be interested in?
Yeah, 100%. Like Dr. Durborow said for us, he's now retiring, so we're kind of part of filling that in, filling some of his responsibilities. So I would be happy to help you with that, especially with my experience in aquatic vegetation management, things like that, the habitat management. Shoot me an email. I'd love to talk and get involved in that as well.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much to Dr. Durborow and Gunnar.